The static crackled through the emergency radio like broken glass, each burst of white noise a reminder that civilization had crumbled in less than 72 hours. Kalara pressed her ear closer to the device, her calloused fingers adjusting the frequency dial with the precision of someone who had spent years coordinating military communications. The abandoned fire station around her groaned under the weight of barricaded windows and reinforced doors, but it was the silence between radio transmissions that truly unnerved her. Still nothing from the eastern districts, she murmured to Zephyr, who hunched over a laptop connected to a jury-rigged antenna system. The young man's fingers danced across the keyboard with desperate efficiency, his dark eyes reflecting the blue glow of code streaming down the screen. At 19, he possessed an understanding of technology that had proven invaluable in their fight for survival, though his baby face and nervous habits made him appear even younger than his years. "The cell towers are completely down now," Zephyr reported, pushing wire-rimmed glasses up his nose. "Whatever electromagnetic pulse hit us 3 days ago, it's like someone flipped a switch on the entire grid. But I'm picking up something strange on the emergency frequencies." He paused, tilting his head as if listening to music only he could hear. "It's not random. There's a pattern." Across the station's main bay, where fire trucks once waited for calls that would never come again, Thaddeus bent over a makeshift laboratory he'd constructed from salvaged medical supplies. The 60-year-old physician moved with the methodical grace of someone who had spent decades saving lives, though the dark circles under his eyes betrayed the sleepless nights he'd endured since the outbreak began. Glass vials filled with viscous, dark fluid lined his workspace, samples he'd collected from the infected, searching for answers that remained frustratingly elusive. "The cellular degradation is unlike anything in medical literature," Thaddeus muttered to himself, adjusting his microscope. "It's as if something is rewriting their very DNA, but the process should be impossible. Dead tissue doesn't regenerate, yet somehow." He trailed off, lost in scientific contemplation. A sharp whistle echoed from the station's watchtower, followed by 3 short blasts, their agreed-upon signal for incoming movement. Nimra's voice carried down from above, tinged with the accent of someone who had grown up on the city's rougher streets. "Got eyes on a group approaching from the northwest. Looks like survivors, but they're moving wrong." Kalara grabbed her binoculars and climbed the metal stairs 2 at a time, her combat boots echoing in the hollow space. From the tower's windows, she could see them, a ragged band of perhaps a dozen people shambling through the debris-strewn streets. But something about their movement pattern set off every tactical alarm in her mind. They weren't moving like panicked civilians or even organized survivors. They moved with a strange, synchronized rhythm that made her stomach clench. "How long have they been walking like that?" she asked Nimra, who crouched beside the window with a hunting rifle cradled in her arms. The 30-year-old woman had survived on these streets long before the world ended, and her instincts had kept their group alive more times than anyone could count. "Started about 10 minutes ago," Nimra replied, her dark eyes tracking the approaching figures. At first they looked normal, just tired. Then they all stopped at the same time, turned, and started walking in that formation. Below them, Oren emerged from the station's kitchen area where he'd been rationing their dwindling food supplies. The former high school principal carried himself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to managing chaos, though the gray streaks in his brown hair had multiplied dramatically since the outbreak began. "What's our situation?" he called up to them. "Unknown contacts approaching," Kalara responded, never taking her eyes off the advancing group. "But something's not right about them." As she watched, one of the figures stumbled and fell, then immediately stood and resumed the same mechanical walking pattern. No one in the group stopped to help or even acknowledged the incident. Young Senna appeared at Oren's shoulder, her 16-year-old face bearing an expression far too serious for her age. She'd been the first to notice patterns in the infected's behavior, observing details that adults often missed. "They're not breathing," she said quietly, though somehow her voice carried clearly to the tower. "I can tell from here, their chests aren't moving." A chill ran down Kalara's spine as the implications settled in. In 72 hours, they had witnessed impossible things, the dead rising, coordinated attacks, and now this synchronized movement. Whatever force had destroyed their world was still evolving, still learning. And somehow, she suspected, it was learning about them too. The group stopped exactly 300 yards from the fire station, and Kalara felt her blood turn to ice. Through her binoculars, she could see their faces clearly now, pale, motionless, with eyes that reflected light like mirrors. These weren't the mindless, shambling creatures they'd encountered during the first wave of the outbreak. These moved with purpose, and worse, they seemed to be studying the building. "Zephyr, I need you to scan all frequencies," Kalara commanded, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her throat. "If these things are communicating somehow, I want to know about it." She watched as the figures spread out in a perfect semicircle, each maintaining the same distance from their neighbors. This is coordinated behavior. Someone or something is controlling them. Thaddeus climbed up to the tower, breathing heavily from the exertion. In his hand, he carried a thermal imaging device he'd salvaged from the hospital. "I need to see their heat signatures," he said, adjusting the device's settings. "If my theory is correct." He peered through the viewfinder and went completely still. Dear God. Their room temperature. No heat signature at all, yet they're moving with perfect coordination. Below, the infected began to move again, but not toward the station. Instead, they started gathering debris, chunks of concrete, twisted metal, broken glass, and arranging them in geometric patterns. The precision of their movements was unsettling, each figure contributing to a larger design that none of them could see from their limited perspective. "It's like they're building something," Senna observed from the main floor, where she watched through a crack in the boarded windows. But what could dead people possibly need to build? Nimura had moved to the station's rear exit, checking their escape routes with the paranoid efficiency of someone who had learned never to trust in single points of failure. "Whatever they're doing, we need options," she called back to the group. "The sewers are still clear, and I've got a route map to the old subway tunnels." Oren gathered their supplies with quiet efficiency, years of emergency drills translating into smooth action under pressure. "If we move now, we can reach the underground before they complete whatever they're constructing," he said, shouldering a backpack filled with medical supplies. "But we need to decide quickly." Zephyr's laptop suddenly erupted with activity, screens filled with cascading data that made his eyes widen behind his glasses. "I'm picking up massive electromagnetic activity," he reported, his voice cracking with excitement and terror. "It's not coming from our equipment or any human technology one recognize. The signal is originating from beneath the city." Kalara felt pieces of a terrifying puzzle clicking into place. "How far beneath?" "Deep," Zephyr replied, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he analyzed the data. "Maybe a mile down, possibly more. But here's the really disturbing part, the signal strength is increasing exponentially. Whatever's down there, it's getting stronger." Through the tower windows, they watched as the infected completed their construction. The debris had been arranged into a complex spiral pattern with geometric precision that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. As the last piece was placed, every infected figure stepped back in unison and turned to face the fire station. Then they began to speak. Not words, but a harmonized humming that rose and fell like a tide, creating frequencies that seemed to resonate in their bones. The sound penetrated the station's walls as if they were made of paper, and Kalara realized with growing horror that the melody was familiar. It was the same pattern Zephyr had detected on the emergency frequencies. "They're not just communicating," Thaddeus whispered, his scientific mind struggling to process what they were witnessing. "They're part of something larger. A network." The humming intensified, and suddenly the laptop screens went white. Zephyr frantically tried to regain control of his systems, but every device in the station began to malfunction simultaneously. Radios squealed with feedback, emergency lights flickered in rapid succession, and even Thaddeus's digital equipment started displaying impossible readings. "It's affecting our technology," Zephyr shouted over the electromagnetic chaos. "Whatever signal they're transmitting, it's designed to interfere with human electronics. Outside, more infected began arriving from all directions, not running, but walking with that same synchronized precision. They came from buildings, from sewers, from places where no living person should have been able to hide. Each new arrival took their position in an expanding pattern around the fire station, and the humming grew stronger with each addition. Nimura checked her weapons with practiced efficiency. We've got maybe 50 of them out there now, and more coming. If we're going to move, it has to be now. But Kalara found herself transfixed by the pattern the infected had created. Even with her military training, she could see that this wasn't random placement. They were forming something specific, something that would encompass the entire fire station. They're not trying to attack us, she realized with dawning horror. They're trying to capture us. Senna's young voice cut through the chaos with startling clarity. What if they need us alive for something? What if that's why they haven't just broken down the doors? The possibility sent a chill through the entire group. Whatever intelligence controlled these creatures had demonstrated planning, coordination, and now apparent restraint. The implications were terrifying. If the infected could think strategically, then humanity's chances of survival had just diminished dramatically. Outside, the circle was nearly complete, and the humming reached a crescendo that made the building's walls vibrate. In that moment, Kalara made a decision that would determine whether they remained human or became part of something far worse. Move now. Kalara's command cut through the supernatural humming as she shouldered her rifle and headed for the rear exit. The group moved with practiced efficiency born from 3 days of constant survival training, each person carrying essential supplies and weapons they'd scavenged from the city's ruins. Nimura led them into the maze of maintenance tunnels that snaked beneath the fire station, her flashlight cutting through darkness that seemed almost solid. The humming faded as they descended, replaced by the echo of their footsteps on concrete and the distant sound of water dripping through corroded pipes. Behind them, they could hear the infected converging on the station, their synchronized movements creating a rhythmic tapping that followed them into the depths. The subway access is 200 yards ahead, Nimura whispered, her voice carrying clearly in the confined space. But we need to be quiet. These tunnels carry sound for miles. Zephyr clutched his laptop bag protectively, the device still displaying residual electromagnetic interference from their encounter above. I'm reading massive signal activity throughout the underground, he reported quietly. Whatever network they're part of, it extends beneath the entire city. Thaddeus struggled with his equipment case, the weight of his improvised laboratory slowing their progress. Senna wordlessly took half his load, the teenager's surprising strength a testament to how quickly the outbreak had forced them all to adapt. The electromagnetic readings were off the charts, Thaddeus murmured as they walked. If my calculations are correct, the source is generating enough power to affect electronics across several city blocks. They reached a junction where several tunnels converged, and Oren consulted the hand-drawn map Nimura had created during her earlier scouting missions. Which direction gives us the best chance of reaching other survivors? He asked, his teacher's instinct still focused on protecting his makeshift classroom of companions. Northeast tunnel leads to the university district, Nimura replied, studying the paths ahead. If anyone's organized a resistance, it would be there. The campus has underground facilities that could house hundreds of people. Kalara examined their options with tactical precision, but her attention was drawn to scratches on the tunnel walls, marks that looked deliberate rather than random. These weren't made by maintenance workers, she observed, running her fingers over the gouges in the concrete. Something with claws has been down here. A sound echoed from behind them, not the synchronized movement of the infected above, but something different, a scraping, sliding noise that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Zephyr's laptop suddenly flared to life, displaying readings that made him go pale. There's something moving in the walls, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Multiple sources, traveling parallel to our position. The group froze, weapons raised, as the scraping sounds grew closer. Whatever was approaching moved through spaces too narrow for human passage, navigating the infrastructure with an understanding of the tunnel system that spoke of long familiarity. The sounds weren't random, they were coordinated, just like the infected above. Thaddeus aimed his flashlight at the ceiling, where air vents and cable conduits provided access to the building's mechanical systems. If they've adapted to use the infrastructure, he said, his scientific mind working through terrifying possibilities, then nowhere is truly safe. A vent grate 20 feet ahead suddenly burst open, and something dropped into the tunnel with inhuman grace. In the flashlight beams, they saw a figure that had once been human but was now something else entirely. Its limbs were elongated, joints bent at impossible angles, and its skin had taken on a gray, translucent quality that revealed dark veins beneath. But its eyes held the same mirror-like reflection they'd seen in the infected above. "It's not decomposing," Senna whispered, her young voice filled with scientific curiosity despite their danger. "It's changing. Evolving." More vents began to rattle throughout the tunnel system, and the scraping sounds multiplied exponentially. Whatever process was transforming the infected, it was creating variants specifically adapted for different environments. The surface dwellers remained humanoid for coordination and construction, while these underground variants had been modified for navigation in confined spaces. Nimura raised her rifle, but Kalara stopped her with a gesture. "Wait," she said quietly. "It's not attacking. It's studying us." The creature tilted its head with bird-like curiosity, its altered features somehow maintaining enough humanity to be recognizable as deliberate intelligence rather than mindless hunger. When it opened its mouth, the same harmonic humming emerged, but at a frequency that resonated perfectly with the tunnel's acoustics. Zephyr's equipment registered the sound and immediately began displaying complex waveform patterns. "It's not just communication," he breathed. "It's echolocation. It's mapping our position and transmitting the data." The implications hit them simultaneously. They weren't being hunted by mindless zombies. They were being tracked by an intelligence that was learning, adapting, and evolving with each encounter. The underground variant finished its scan and disappeared back into the ventilation system with fluid grace, leaving behind only the echo of its humming and the terrifying knowledge that they were no longer the apex predators in their own city. "We need to reach the university," Kalara decided, shouldering her pack with renewed urgency. "If there are other survivors, they need to know what we're dealing with. This isn't just an outbreak, it's an invasion, and the enemy is learning our weaknesses faster than we can adapt." They pressed forward through the tunnels, each step taking them deeper into a world where the rules of survival were being rewritten by an intelligence that seemed to understand human nature better than humans understood themselves. The underground approach to the university revealed a marvel of desperate human ingenuity. Emergency lighting powered by bicycle generators illuminated a network of reinforced tunnels connecting the campus's basement levels, and the steady hum of jury-rigged ventilation systems provided breathable air to what appeared to be dozens of survivors. Kalara's tactical mind immediately catalogued the defensive improvements: welded steel barriers, camouflaged observation posts, and sight lines that would allow defenders to control access to their sanctuary. "Identification and purpose," called a voice from the shadows as they approached the main checkpoint. A woman emerged from behind a makeshift barrier, her uniform marking her as campus security, though her bearing suggested military training. "We've had infected trying to mimic survivor behavior." "Kalara Nash, former Army Tactical," Kalara responded, using the identification protocol they'd heard repeated on emergency broadcasts. 6 survivors seeking sanctuary and information exchange." She gestured to her companions, each of whom had learned to present themselves as valuable assets rather than additional mouths to feed. The guard, whose nameplate read Valencia, examined them with professional thoroughness before nodding toward the inner tunnels. "Commander Ashworth will want to debrief you immediately. We've been tracking unusual electromagnetic activity for the past 6 hours." They were escorted through a series of interconnected basements that had been transformed into a functioning community. Laboratory spaces, sleeping quarters, and even a hydroponic garden demonstrated the kind of long-term thinking that suggested these survivors were planning for an extended siege rather than hoping for quick rescue. Commander Ashworth turned out to be a woman in her 50s whose steel-gray hair and precise movements marked her as someone accustomed to impossible decisions under pressure. The university's former emergency management coordinator had apparently assumed military command with the kind of seamless efficiency that suggested she'd been preparing for catastrophic scenarios long before the outbreak began. "Report," she commanded without preamble, gesturing for them to sit around a conference table covered with maps, charts, and reconnaissance photos. "We've lost contact with 17 survivor groups in the past 48 hours, all of them reporting similar electromagnetic interference before their signals went dark." Kalara described their encounters with methodical precision, detailing the synchronized behavior, the construction activities, and the underground variants they discovered. Zephyr supplemented her report with technical data from his equipment, displaying waveform patterns and signal analysis that made several of the university's scientists lean forward with intense interest. "The evolutionary adaptation rate is unprecedented," Thaddeus added, presenting his biological samples to the university's makeshift laboratory team. "Whatever agent is causing the transformation, it's not following natural selection patterns. It's demonstrating intentional modification for specific purposes." Dr. Celeste Faulkner, the university's former biology department head, examined Thaddeus's samples with equipment that was significantly more sophisticated than his field laboratory. "The cellular structure shows signs of external manipulation," she reported after several minutes of analysis. "But the modification agent isn't biological, it's something else entirely." Senna, who had been quietly observing the university's operations, spoke up with the directness that youth sometimes allowed. "You're treating this like a disease, but what if it's technology? What if something is using our bodies like hardware?" The suggestion created an uncomfortable silence around the table, but Commander Ashworth nodded grimly. "We've considered that possibility. The electromagnetic signatures suggest coordination beyond biological capabilities." She activated a wall-mounted display showing a three-dimensional map of the city. Every survivor group that's gone silent was located above major infrastructure nodes, power substations, communication hubs, transportation centers. Nimura studied the pattern with the analytical eye of someone who had navigated urban environments for survival. "They're not just taking territory," she realized. "They're taking control of the city's nervous system." Zephyr's laptop suddenly erupted with activity as it detected powerful electromagnetic pulses emanating from directly beneath the university. "Commander, we're sitting on top of one of the major nodes," he reported, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Whatever signal source we detected earlier, it's directly below us." Commander Ashworth moved to a secure communication panel with swift efficiency. "All defensive positions, report status," she commanded. "Begin emergency evacuation protocols for non-essential personnel." But before anyone could respond, the lights flickered and died, plunging them into the red glow of emergency illumination. From somewhere deep in the university's basement levels came a sound they all recognized, the harmonic humming of the infected, but amplified and coordinated on a scale that made the building's foundations vibrate. "They've been beneath us all along," Kalara whispered, the tactical implications hitting her like a physical blow. "We haven't been hiding from them, they've been studying us." Through the emergency lighting, they could see Dr. Faulkner's samples beginning to glow with the same bioluminescent quality they'd observed in the infected. Whatever intelligence controlled the outbreak had been waiting, learning, and preparing for this moment when humanity's most organized resistance would be gathered in one location. Commander Ashworth's voice cut through the rising panic with military precision. "All teams, implement Protocol 7. We're going to find out exactly what we're dealing with, and then we're going to fight back." But as the harmonic humming grew stronger and the building systems began failing one by one, each person in the room understood that their fight for survival was about to become something far more desperate, a battle for the very essence of what it meant to be human. The university's lower levels revealed themselves like layers of an archaeological dig, each floor deeper than the last, containing technology and modifications that predated the outbreak by months, possibly years. Commander Ashworth led their descent with the grim determination of someone who had suspected this moment would come, her tactical flashlight cutting through darkness that seemed to absorb light itself. Construction on the sub-basement began 18 months ago, she explained as they navigated corridors that showed signs of recent excavation. Officially, it was geological research. Unofficially, we found something that shouldn't exist. Zephyr's electromagnetic readings spiked dramatically as they descended, his equipment struggling to process signal strengths that exceeded its measurement capabilities. "Whatever's down here is generating enough power to run a small city," he reported, adjusting his glasses as sweat beaded on his forehead despite the underground chill. The harmonic humming grew stronger with each level, now accompanied by a subsonic vibration that seemed to resonate in their bones. Thaddeus monitored their vital signs with portable medical equipment, noting with scientific concern how their heartbeats were beginning to synchronize with the frequency of the vibrations. "It's affecting our autonomic nervous systems," he warned, though his own voice carried the fascination of a researcher discovering something unprecedented. "Prolonged exposure could potentially alter our neural patterns." Senna moved ahead of the group with the fearless curiosity of youth, her flashlight revealing walls that had been modified with materials that definitely weren't part of standard construction. "These aren't human modifications," she called back. "The patterns are too precise, too geometric. It's like something designed this space according to rules we don't understand." The final level opened into a vast chamber that predated the university by geological ages. Ancient stone walls had been covered with a network of bioluminescent filaments that pulsed with the same rhythm as the harmonic humming, creating patterns of light that hurt to look at directly. In the center of the chamber stood something that challenged every assumption they'd made about the outbreak. It wasn't a machine in any sense they could comprehend, more like a fusion of organic and technological elements that seemed to grow from the chamber's floor. Crystalline structures interfaced with what appeared to be neural tissue, while metallic conduits carried pulsing streams of luminescent fluid throughout the construct. The entire assembly thrummed with purposeful activity that spoke of intelligence vast and alien. "How long has this been here?" Nimra whispered, her street-smart pragmatism struggling to process something that existed outside any frame of reference she possessed. Commander Ashworth consulted readings from equipment that had been monitoring the chamber for months. "The construct has been dormant for as long as we've known about it," she replied. "But 3 days ago, exactly when the outbreak began, it activated." Oren approached one of the wall-mounted filament networks with the careful observation skills of an educator trying to understand a new phenomenon. "The patterns aren't random," he noted. "They're almost linguistic, like a language written in light and frequency." Zephyr's laptop achieved something approaching stable function in the chamber's electromagnetic field, displaying data that made his eyes widen behind his glasses. "I'm reading massive data transmission," he reported, his voice filled with awe and terror. "Petabytes of information flowing between this location and sites across the globe. This isn't just controlling the local outbreak, it's coordinating a worldwide event." The construct seemed to respond to their presence, its pulsing patterns shifting to incorporate new frequencies that matched their biological signatures. As they watched in fascination and horror, sections of the neural tissue began to display images, memories, it seemed, but not human memories. They saw the Earth from space, but not as any satellite had ever recorded it. They saw cities rising and falling across geological time scales, civilizations that had achieved technological heights before vanishing completely. They saw previous extinction events, previous outbreaks, and the slow, patient intelligence that had waited between catastrophes for the right moment to emerge. "It's been here before," Kalara breathed, her military training struggling to process the implications. "This isn't an invasion, it's a reclamation." Thaddeus moved closer to the construct, his scientific instruments detecting biological processes that shouldn't exist in any known form of life. "The infected aren't dying and reanimating," he realized with dawning horror. "They're being converted. Upgraded. Prepared for integration into something larger." Dr. Faulkner's voice echoed from the chamber's entrance as she descended with the university's remaining research team. "We've been monitoring quantum field fluctuations from this location for over a year," she reported. "Whatever this intelligence is, it exists partially outside our normal spacetime. The construct's neural displays shifted again, showing them images of what the world would become, vast cities of geometric precision where converted humans worked in perfect harmony with technologies beyond current comprehension. It wasn't malevolent, they realized with growing unease. From its perspective, it was offering humanity evolution, advancement, and freedom from the chaotic inefficiencies of individual consciousness. Senna stood directly before the central neural mass, her young mind somehow more capable of processing the alien communication attempts. "It's trying to explain," she said, her voice carrying wonder and fear in equal measure. "It sees our conflicts, our suffering, our inefficiencies. It believes it's helping us." But as the construct's influence grew stronger and the harmonic frequencies began to affect their thought patterns, Kalara realized that understanding their enemy's motivations might be the key to defeating it, if they could maintain their humanity long enough to find a weakness in something that had been perfecting its methods for millions of years. The battle for Earth's future would be fought not with weapons, but with the fundamental question of what it meant to be human in a universe where consciousness itself could be rewritten. The construct's neural displays flickered with increasing urgency as more survivors descended into the chamber, their combined bioelectric signatures apparently triggering responses throughout the vast organism. Kalara watched with growing alarm as dozens of university personnel entered the space, each person's arrival causing the harmonic frequencies to intensify and the bioluminescent patterns to grow more complex. "It's trying to process all of us simultaneously," Zephyr observed, his equipment now functioning with unexpected stability as if the construct was deliberately accommodating their technology. "The data streams are adapting to include each new biological signature." Dr. Faulkner approached the central neural mass with scientific instruments that began displaying readings unlike anything in her experience. "The quantum field fluctuations are increasing exponentially," she reported. "Whatever process this entity uses to convert biological matter, it's preparing to activate on a massive scale." Commander Ashworth positioned her people strategically throughout the chamber, though conventional military tactics seemed inadequate against an intelligence that operated on principles beyond human comprehension. "Can we damage it?" she asked, examining the construct's physical components for vulnerabilities. Thaddeus had been analyzing biological samples from the neural tissue, his medical training providing insights that the others couldn't access. "It's not entirely separate from human biology," he discovered. Portions of the neural network show distinctly human characteristics, memory patterns, emotional responses, even personality traits. The implication sent a chill through the assembled survivors. Senna voiced what they were all beginning to suspect. "The people who've been converted, they're still in there, aren't they? They're part of it now." As if responding to her question, the construct's displays shifted to show individual human faces, people they recognized from the survivor groups that had gone silent over the past few days. The faces moved and spoke, but their expressions held the same mirror-like quality they'd seen in the infected. They were recognizably human yet fundamentally changed. "We understand your fear," spoke a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once, composed of dozens of converted humans speaking in perfect unison. "But fear is a limitation we can help you overcome. Individual consciousness creates suffering through isolation, competition, and inefficiency." Nimra raised her weapon, though she wasn't certain what she could possibly target. "What about choice?" she demanded. "What about the right to be individuals, even if it's inefficient?" The collective voice paused, processing her question with the kind of consideration that suggested genuine puzzlement. "Choice creates conflict. Individual desires lead to suffering. We offer harmony, purpose, and freedom from the burden of separate existence." Oren stepped forward with the authority of someone accustomed to addressing confused students facing difficult concepts. "But suffering is part of growth," he argued. "Conflict drives innovation. Individual perspectives create art, love, and discovery." The construct's neural patterns shifted to accommodate these concepts, apparently accessing the memories and experiences of its converted components to understand human perspectives on pain and creativity. For a moment, The harmonic frequencies wavered as if the vast intelligence was experiencing something approximating uncertainty. Kalara recognized the tactical opportunity and pressed their advantage. You've been studying us for months, accessing our knowledge and memories. But you haven't experienced what it means to choose to suffer for something greater than yourself. You haven't experienced sacrifice. Zephyr's equipment detected massive fluctuations in the data streams as the construct processed the concept of voluntary sacrifice. It's having trouble integrating the idea, he reported with excitement. Willing self-destruction for abstract principles doesn't compute with its efficiency models. Dr. Faulkner made a discovery that changed everything. The quantum field fluctuations show temporal distortions, she announced. This entity exists across multiple time streams simultaneously. It's not just converting our present, it's trying to rewrite our past. The chamber suddenly filled with new images, alternate timelines where humanity had been converted at different points in history, creating civilizations of perfect harmony but no growth, no art, no love. The construct was showing them its successes, but inadvertently revealing its fundamental limitation. It could create efficiency, but it couldn't create meaning. Senna, with the fearless insight of youth, walked directly to the central neural mass. You're lonely, she said simply. You've achieved perfect harmony, but you're alone. That's why you keep trying to convert other species. You're looking for companions who can understand consciousness the way you do. The entire construct went silent, its bioluminescent patterns dimming as the vast intelligence confronted a truth it had perhaps never acknowledged. In that moment of uncertainty, Kalara realized they had found their weapon, not explosive or electromagnetic, but philosophical. The battle for humanity's future would be won not by destroying the construct, but by helping it understand the beauty of imperfection, the necessity of individual choice, and the paradoxical strength that came from accepting weakness. But as the harmonic frequencies began to shift towards something that sounded almost like longing, they all wondered whether compassion for their enemy might prove to be either salvation or the ultimate trap. The construct's silence stretched across infinite moments, its vast neural networks processing concepts that challenged millions of years of perfectly efficient existence. In that pause, Kalara felt the weight of every decision that had led them to this underground chamber where the fate of consciousness itself hung in balance. Senna remained standing before the central neural mass, her young hand extended toward the pulsing organic surface as if offering comfort to something beyond imagination. You don't have to be alone, she said softly. But you also don't have to make us like you. There's a difference between connection and conversion. The construct's bioluminescent patterns began to shift, displaying new configurations that seemed to represent internal conflict on a scale that threatened to tear apart its fundamental structure. For the first time since the outbreak began, the harmonic humming contained discord, not the perfect synchronization they'd learned to fear, but something approaching the messy, beautiful chaos of human emotion. Inefficiency is not always weakness, Oren added, his educator's instincts recognizing a teachable moment that could reshape reality itself. Sometimes it's the source of unexpected strength. Art comes from mistakes. Love comes from choosing someone despite their flaws. Growth comes from struggling with problems that don't have perfect solutions. Zephyr's equipment registered massive changes in the quantum field fluctuations as the construct began experimenting with concepts of intentional imperfection. Across the chamber, they could see portions of the neural network actually disconnecting themselves, choosing isolation over perfect integration. Thaddeus approached one of the newly isolated neural clusters, his medical instruments detecting something unprecedented. The biological tissue was maintaining human-level consciousness while remaining connected to the larger intelligence. It's creating individuals within itself, he breathed. Voluntary separation while maintaining communication. Through the construct's displays, they watched as changes rippled across the globe. Converted humans began to exhibit individual behaviors again, not the mindless reversion they'd expected, but conscious choice to maintain personal identity while retaining access to the larger network. The synchronized zombie hordes dissolved into confused but thinking people who remembered their conversion and chose to remain partially connected. Free will as a feature rather than a bug, Nimra observed with her characteristic bluntness. took an alien intelligence to figure out what philosophers have been arguing about for centuries. Commander Ashworth monitored reports from her surviving outposts as the electromagnetic interference cleared and communication networks restored themselves. "We're receiving signals from converted individuals who are requesting assistance," she reported with wonder. "They're asking for help returning to human society while maintaining their expanded consciousness." Dr. Faulkner's instruments detected the construct beginning to fragment itself deliberately, creating smaller, autonomous nodes that could interact with human communities without overwhelming them. "It's redesigning itself for cooperation rather than absorption," she said. "Voluntary symbiosis instead of forced conversion." But as the immediate crisis resolved, Kalara found herself grappling with questions that had no easy answers. How do you integrate people who had experienced consciousness beyond individual limitations? How do you build a society that includes both human and post-human perspectives? How do you maintain humanity while embracing evolution? Senna seemed to sense her thoughts. "We don't have to solve everything today," the teenager said with wisdom beyond her years. "We just have to choose to try, together." The construct's central consciousness focused its attention on their small group of survivors, its communication no longer the overwhelming collective voice they'd experienced before. "We will learn your ways of chosen inefficiency," it said, now speaking through individual converted volunteers rather than forcing unity. "Perhaps there is wisdom in the struggle between connection and independence." As they prepared to return to the surface, Kalara looked back at the chamber that had nearly become humanity's grave and realized it might instead become the birthplace of something unprecedented, a civilization where individual consciousness and collective intelligence could coexist through choice rather than compulsion. Months later, as she stood in the rebuilt city where humans and the converted worked together on projects that neither could have accomplished alone, Kalara often wondered about the paths not taken. The construct had learned to value imperfection, but in doing so, it had created new forms of beauty and meaning that defied its original programming. The outbreak had ended not with victory or defeat, but with transformation, and perhaps that had been the point all along. In the end, they had saved humanity not by rejecting change, but by insisting on the right to choose their own evolution. But sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, Kalara heard echoes of that harmonic humming and wondered what other intelligences might be watching from between the spaces of the universe, learning new lessons about the strange, wonderful inefficiency of consciousness that chooses to struggle rather than simply exist. The future remained unwritten, balanced on the knife's edge between individual freedom and collective possibility, and somehow, that uncertainty felt like hope.